بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
We continue with Safinatul Najat by Sheikh Salim Al-Hadrami rahimahullah ta'ala wa nafa'ana Allah bi'ulumihi fi ad-darain ameen. We covered the book is divided into chapters or sections. The first section of the book, the author speaks about Islam and Iman, the foundation of this deen. And now he's going to start the chapter on Tahara, purification. Before getting into the chapter of Tahara, the translator, also commentator, he has a section where he leaves a note about al-Ahkam al-Shar'iyya. And so this is from the commentator. His name is Sheikh Abdullah al-Marbuqi, hafidhahullah. He says that the rules of sacred law, the rulings of sacred law are 5. So according to the predominant opinion of the madhahib, and in the Shafi'i school specifically, al-Ahkam al-Shar'iyya, there are 5. The Islamic law, they fall into one of 5 categories. It's either wajib, or mandub, or mubah, or makruh, or haram. All ahkam fall into one of these 5. Either it's wajib, it's mandatory, and the way the scholars they describe it is, they say wajib is a person ma yuthabu fa'iluh wa yu'aqibu tarikuh. If a person does it, they get rewarded, and if they abstain from it, they get punished. So that's how they define wajib. It's something, if you do it, you get thawab, you get ajr for it, but if you don't do it, there's iqab, there's a sin, there's a punishment. Mandub is recommended. Another word for mandub is mustahab or sunnah. The word sunnah, it can be used as mandub, but sunnah can mean different things in different contexts. So if you're speaking about Quran and sunnah is referring to everything about the Prophet ﷺ, right? And if you say sunnah as, all the things that he used to do can also be sunnah. The wajib and the mandub can also be described as sunnah. When we say in ahkam al-shar'iyya something is sunnah, it doesn't mean the Prophet ﷺ necessarily did it, but it means that it is something recommended by sharia. That if you did it, you get an ajr for it, and if you don't do it, there's no sin. So those are synonyms. So it can be, the words are mandub. Another synonym for mandub is mustahab, and another synonym for mustahab is sunnah. And this is in the context of fiqh. A third hukum is mubah, and these are things that are permissible. There's no sin or reward either way. And these are general things like eating, drinking, so on and so forth, sleeping. These, naturally, they're mubah. There's no virtue, but a person can turn them into ibadah. If they intend that they're using these permissible things as a way to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they can turn it into ibadah. And the awliya, the atqiya, the salihin, every nafas, every breath they're taking is ibadah. Every bite they eat and every movement they make, they intend the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that's the level of iman and piety that requires a lot of mujahada. That we do those natural acts that we do, we have an intention of qurbah. We're trying to draw close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This requires a lot of awareness, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of ikhlas. That you're eating this meal and you say, Ya Rabb, I eat this to draw closer to you. Right? And I only eat it in the way you permit it. And I eat from it in a way that is pleasing to you and that will assist me in drawing closer to you. So that type of awareness, it requires a constant revival of sincerity, a constant revival of intention. And so although these a'mal are permissible, they can be turned into qurbah, into ibadah, with the proper intention. The fourth ruling is makruh. And these are things that are offensive. And these are, they don't say it's not haram. In some schools, they have makruh tanzihi and makruh tahrimi. In the Hanafi school and some of the Salaf, they use makruh in different forms. But when we speak about the majority of the scholars in the Shafi'i school specifically, makruh generally means something offensive, meaning that if you do it, if you refrain from it, there's a reward. You shouldn't do it. But if you did it, there's no sin. So such as eating with the left hand, right? It's makruh. So if a person eats with their left hand, if they don't eat with their left hand, they get ajr for it. But if they eat with their left hand, there's no sin. It's not haram. So that's what makruh means. Makruh means something that Sharia told us not to do, but there's no sin if we did do it. So it's offensive. The term here is used, that's used as offensive. A lot of ahkam people, they mistake makruh for haram. Oftentimes people will take issues like, like for example, issues of adab even, like, or haircut. Sometimes you hear a lot of the youth get criticized for their haircut, but all of the rulings of haircuts are not haram and wajib. It's all about karaha. Some haircuts are offensive and others are permissible. But there's no haram. There's no haram haircut in Islam. From what I know, unless there's a specific relationship to a religion or has some type of symbolic meaning to a certain faith, there's no type of haircut that's specifically haram, but some haircuts are makruh, such as shaving part of the head and leaving hair on the other part. The Prophet ﷺ, forbade it, but this is karaha, tanzih. He didn't like it, alayhi salatu wasalam, but it wasn't that if a person did it, that they committed a sin for doing so. So it's important to know these ahkam because we don't want to turn ahkam of karaha into issues of haram and halal. You have to have your priorities, right? When you want to work with somebody, you want to give them da'wah, you don't start with the small issues. You first prioritize the bigger issues. Can we get this person to pray salah? Can we get them to attend the masjid, be in the gathering of the Muslimin? Once we have these foundations, then we can worry about those more detailed ahkam. So then even with the wajibat, it needs hikmah as well. Once I remember I was speaking to one of my shuyukh, and I was like, there's a brother, he's alcoholic, he doesn't pray, he deals in riba, he works for I think a car dealership at that time, and so he's selling cars based on interest and things, and he's like, start with his salah. Don't talk to him about anything, just start with his salah. He's like, you have to prioritize. What's the greatest issue you have with this man needs in his life? I said, he doesn't pray, but he has all these issues as well. He said, leave all those right now. Start with the most important, which is salah. Once the person comes to salah, then inshallah the other ahkam will follow. They will gradually learn and refrain from it. And so this type of awareness of not just between haram and makruh and wajib and sunnah, but we also need to have awareness of the levels of sins and the levels of wajibat. One of the mashayikh, he was talking about hijab. He said, not wearing hijab, proper hijab in salah is a major sin because it invalidates the salah and therefore and it counts as if the person didn't pray if their hijab is not proper. Outside of salah, not wearing the hijab is a minor sin. It's min as-saghair. Sins are two types, major and minor. So he said outside of salah, not wearing hijab is a minor sin. The sins are not all the same, right? So he said if a woman doesn't wear her hijab properly in salah, she's committed a major sin because it leads to the invalidation of salah. And so as long as, that's the number one. Have her pray her salah correctly and wear her hijab properly in her salah. Outside of salah, he says it's a minor sin. Of course you want to work on it, but also understand the levels of sins as well. So the levels of wajibat have to be understood, right? Compare salah to, for example, dealing in riba and drinking alcohol. Salah is the greater wajib of all these things. Refraining from alcohol and riba are after. And then when he said when it comes to other haram issues as well, for example, hijab in salah is more serious than hijab outside of salah. And so being aware of these ahkam. So the scholars, generally when they teach fiqh, they categorize the ahkam in these 5 categories. Wajib, wa mandub, wa mubah, wa makruh, wa haram. And so that's what the author starts, the commentator starts with. As for the author, rahimahullah, the second section that we're on, he's going to speak about tahara. And why do our scholars typically, they start with the book of tahara, even in hadith. If you read Sahih Bukhari and other books of hadith, they'll mention the hadith of iman and Islam and aqidah in the beginning, and then right away they start with the chapter of tahara. And the reason is, the pillars of Islam are 5, right? Shahada, Salah, Zakah, Sawm, Hajj. So we talked about the pillars of Islam and Iman, that's Shahada. Right? That goes into Iman. The second pillar of Islam is Salah. But what is required before Salah? All the shurut of Salah. There are 8 shurut. There are 8 conditions or prerequisites that are required before Salah. So the scholars, before they write about Salah and they tell you how to pray Salah, they'll speak to you about the shurut of Salah. And so the greatest, or one of the greatest shurut of Salah is tahara, is purification, to have physical purity. And then the author here, rahimahullah, he starts with the signs of puberty, or the signs of maturity. And so he says on page 9, this book, inshallah, is available. I just brought a box of the book, inshallah, here. It's, the masjid is selling it. It's $15, inshallah ta'ala. And so if brothers and sisters want to follow along, I encourage you to grab a copy. And we have these durus every night except Tuesdays and Thursdays. So every night at Isha, inshallah, we'll have this dars, inshallah ta'ala. So inshallah, tonight we'll just talk about the alamat al-bulugh, and then we'll conclude. We'll get into the second part tomorrow, inshallah, the second section. So the signs of purity are 3. Why did he start with the signs of purity? And before I continue, does anybody have a guess? Why start with the signs of puberty? What's the hikmah? That's the time, Salah, people are mandated to pray. So he said, you have to know first, what age is Salah obligatory upon a person. And so he starts by identifying the 3 signs of puberty. And these are 3 major signs. There are a lot of minor signs. And so the 3 major signs, he says, number 1, reaching the age of 15 years for a female or a male. So 15 lunar years. We know that the lunar years are about 10 days shorter than the solar years. So a person turns 15 in the Islamic calendar, at least a few months before they do turn 15 in the solar calendar. So he says if a person reaches the age of 15, they have automatically reached the age of maturity. Even if they physically haven't experienced puberty, they haven't went through the physical changes of puberty, they're considered mature. And this in Sharia is called mukallaf. There's somebody that has responsibilities, Islamic responsibilities, and they're accountable before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This person is called a mukallaf. So when a person reaches the age of 15, they are mukallaf. They have obligations, their a'mal are recorded, their sins are recorded. To be more exact, is that the wajibat and the sunnah, the muharramat are recorded. As for good deeds, they're recorded from the sin of tamyiz. So the scholars, they divide the ages into 3 when it comes to ahkam. There's the sin of tamyiz. This is the age of discernment. This is the age of 7 roughly. So they say from the sin at tamyiz, children are rewarded for their good deeds. But there's no sin on their shoulders. So there's no sin for their bad deeds, but they are rewarded for their good deeds. So if a kid is praying at the age of 7, 8, 9, 10, he gets rewarded for those salah. And if they're giving sadaqah, they get rewarded for their sadaqah. And if they are, doing any good deed, as long as they meet the requirements, they get rewarded for their good deeds. So this is sunnah tamyiz. This is sunnah tamyiz. The scholars, they say, if a child that is 10 years old or 9 years old make hajj, does it fulfill the hajj of Islam? It doesn't. Because that hajj isn't obligated yet. But if they perform hajj as a kid, they get the reward of hajj. If they perform umrah, they get the reward of umrah, but it doesn't fulfill the obligation because that doesn't apply till they reach the age of maturity. So the age where children are rewarded actually starts from the age of discernment, the age of tamyiz. Sin, it doesn't start till the age of bulugh, or the age of taklif, the age where they are responsible. That's when sins and obligations are fulfilled, is in that age. And so one of the one sign that is, just concrete is the age of 15. They reach that age according to the lunar year or Islamic calendar. Then they are obligated to perform salah and fast Ramadan. And this is something that people have to pay attention to. When your child is 13, it isn't optional. It isn't, he's a kid. No, they're an adult. They are obligated to fast. And the only time they don't fast if there is a health reason or traveling or something of that sake. But you can't just simply say, oh, my child, I don't want to put a burden on them, they're still young. Shir'an, Allah is more merciful to them than you are. And so if it was harmful to them, Allah wouldn't have obligated it. But if there's a health risk, of course, then that's considered. But simply to say, sometimes parents, where we get gentle towards our children, they're like, they go to school, it's fine, they go to school. The Muslims go to school in Ramadan around the world in their fasting. And so this is something to be aware of, that at that age, all the ahkam apply. Also for girls. 15. If they don't reach the physical signs, right? If there's no physical sign, 15. Once they hit 15, even if there's no physical sign, they're obligated. You're going to treat them like an adult with regards to their wajibat and their responsibilities in their deen. Of course, with wisdom. We don't want to, push them away, and we don't want to, discourage them from the deen. So it requires wisdom, but as parents, we want to encourage it as much as we can. So this is the age of 15. The second sign of puberty is experiencing a wet dream by a 9-year-old girl, a boy or girl. And the reason a wet dream is a sign that the human body has matured enough to reproduce. Right? What is puberty? Puberty means your body has went through the hormonal changes to reproduce. You can have children now. Right? That's what puberty is. And so as soon as the body is able to reproduce, and that is discharge of semen or experiencing a wet dream, that will be the first sign when the body is able to reproduce, male or female, male most of the time, their first sign of maturity will be what? That they have a wet dream, a discharge of semen. As soon as that occurs, that means now their body has went through that change, right? That hormonal physical change, where now they're able to reproduce a human being. And so at that point, all their a'mal, their wajibat, and their sins are recorded for them and against them. And so that applies to both boys and girls. It's important that at this age, we also have to, teach our children all the other wajibat of Islam. Meaning that anything that's wajib in Islam, we should be making sure that they also adhere to this. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions, command them to pray at the age of 7, and at the age of 10, punish them for it if they don't pray. And so this hadith, it gives us a guideline on how to raise our children upon the practice of Islam. Teach your children to practice Islam starting from the age of 7. You don't have to be strict and treat them as adults, but you want to condition them. You want to condition them to act like a Muslim, to dress like a Muslim, to pray their salah, to get up for Fajr, right? Because if you don't start teaching them at a young age, and you don't teach them, at the age of 7, pray your salah every day, right? And I always tell the best way to teach a child is by being an example, model for them. Be a role model. That is the best and most powerful way to teach your children. Pray salah with them every day. Pray Fajr with them every day. They will pray salah. It will be a part of their life. It will become something that they feel that is naturally part of who they are. But if we don't teach them and we just command them, it becomes very hard, right? We all know it's hard to change a habit. And so if we teach a child, you grow up your whole childhood and your adolescence without making salah, by the time that child is an adult or in their late teens, salah is something they view like it's a burden. Why are you making me pray salah? And so they find discomfort in it. And so the way we approach our children with salah is that we teach them salah from the age of 7. We normalize it. We condition them to make salah, to make wudu, to do all these a'mal correctly. And so by the age of 10, they're doing it routinely. By the age of maturity, salah is set and they're performing it. Same with fasting, right? Same with fasting. And so at that age, we should teach our children to start fasting a bit. And as they get older, fast a bit more. So that by the age of 10, they're fasting most of Ramadan, if not all of it. And then by the age of maturity, they should be fasting the entire month of Ramadan. And then the last ruling is menstruation for a 9-year-old girl. And so the menstruation is a sign of maturity because that's the sign that a woman can reproduce, right? She has that's when her eggs are cleaned out and she has a new set of eggs right after menses. And so that's also a sign that a woman is able to reproduce. And so that's her sign of maturity for a woman, or a sign of puberty. Typically, our scholars, they teach, today in the West, they have they have a subject called sex education. And so they teach our children, typically in middle school and up, every year, during a time of the year, I think this year, it was late January or February. So if you have children in middle school, high school, they're pretty much learning this stuff. And it's done without any modesty. It's very inappropriate. They teach them how to have sex and how to be safe about it, and this and that, and they teach them it's completely fine, and they normalize it, just giving them etiquette on how to do it safely and in a safe manner. And they do it without shame, any modesty. And if you see kind of the examples they use and the method, and right now with the whole change in sexual values and identities, and it's something that is very problematic for a Muslim and our values and our beliefs. And so typically our scholars, they teach the ahkam of puberty, maturity, kind of sexual desire and changes. They teach it in the chapter of tahara. And so when we learn about tahara, we're going to learn about ghusl, we're going to learn about discharge, wet dreams. All of these things are being taught. And so this is the kind of the traditional way Muslims taught about kind of sexual education and physical purity, but we never label it sexual education. The Western society, they're obsessed with sex and the fulfillment of desires. So that's why it's such a big thing. The culture, the movies, the music, the shows, the sports, everything, they highlight it. It's the peak of their kind of gratification, is this physical pleasure, right? As for Muslims, no. This is a human desire that is permissible, but it has to be disciplined and tamed. If it's not, the human desire can corrupt people and corrupt the world, right? And so desire, we're learned, has to be disciplined, has to be controlled, has to be tamed, and has to be purified and guided with the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, it will lead the human being to act like an animal. It will lead the human being to just become another behemoth, another animal that sleeps, eats, and mates and reproduces and is all living for just gratification with no higher meaning or purpose, right? And so our deen teaches very opposite of Western society and kind of Western value, where it's really centered around the human self and the fulfillment of the human desire and the gratification of the human being. And so in this chapter, typically our scholars, they teach these masail. They teach these masail. And so some of it might be at times inappropriate for younger children, but we'll try to keep it, inshallah ta'ala, age appropriate, inshallah ta'ala. And so the other ruling is that, the other matter masala is that for women, the sign of maturity is menstruation at the age of 9, because that's typically the youngest age they've documented menses was the age of 9 in the early centuries of Islam. But today they've actually found that girls before the age of 9 can have it, can have their menses. So it's not a hard number that we have to stick to, but it can actually fluctuate and it can be younger than the age of 9. Typically it's around the age of 12, 13, or 10, depending on society. They found that today, medical studies have found that youth are experiencing puberty at a younger age than previous generations. And this is being associated with all of the kind of the processed foods and chemicals of today. It's causing the human body to mature at a faster rate than it used to before. And so this is something that is being documented, and medical studies have found that children are experiencing puberty at an earlier rate. Generally in history, when boys and girls reach the age of maturity, they were intellectually mature as they were physical. And so typically, in the past, not too far ago, maybe just, a few decades ago, at the age of 14, 15, it was normal for a person to have a family. It was normal for a young man to have children and for a young woman to get married and have a family. And even earlier than that in some cultures. And so children matured intellectually and emotionally at the same rate their body matured. In our modern time, there's been kind of a delay in intellectual and emotional maturity. But the physical maturity has actually accelerated, and the intellectual and emotional maturity has actually become very delayed. So you'll find, a 20-year-old man today, and with women, it's actually because women generally, they mature faster than men. And so you will find girls typically more responsible than men and mature and kind of know their priorities and life goals a lot sooner than men will. But worse today, the issue we have is that the mindset of an 18-year-old man or a 20-year-old man and the behavior resembles that of like a 12-year-old boy, 11-year-old boy, just 3-4 decades ago. You see this kind of significant gap. You're like, when I was your age, I was doing X, Y, and Z, and I had my priorities, and I knew my responsibilities, and I was there for my parents, and I upheld these values, and there were certain things that were inappropriate for me to do at this age. And subhanAllah, today you see a 20-year-old man, and you're like, I was more mature than you when you were 12 years. And these are our elders speaking, right? And so the elders, and I've seen it. I've gotten my share of criticism, growing up, and so I'm definitely part of that younger generation. But you see it, it's kind of getting worse and worse as time progresses, right? You see that that maturity and manhood, a lot of youth don't really become men till a lot later. They're physically, they look like men, but intellectually and emotionally, behaviorally, they're still like children. And so this is a fitna of the modern time. And so it's very important that as parents and as a community, we're very aware that the culture, the way it conditions children today, it really over amplifies their desires, and it delays the onset of intellectual and spiritual maturity. And so part of a lot of ways to combat that, first of all, there's much that can be said, and inshallah, maybe there's a book written recently by Imam Walid, I forgot his name, Walid Dawood, if I'm not mistaken. I think he says the name of his book is Raising Boys into Sacred Manhood, or something like that. And he talks about this issue. He's a brother, I think, from Michigan, African-American brother. Very well, mashallah, he's written numerous books. And he talks about this issue. He said we have a crisis where our women are maturing a lot faster and our boys are maturing at a lower pace. And it's creating a crisis in our community where, first of all, our women out-qualify our boys in marriage. So we have a 20-year-old, 22-year-old woman who's ready to get married and raise a family by her early 20s, and this young man over here in his early 20s, he still doesn't know what he wants to do with his life. He still wants to hang out with his friends and play basketball and have fun, which is fine and permissible, but there's kind of no greater responsibility. Like, okay, let me get a career. I want to raise a family. I need to care for my parents and my younger siblings, and I need to be supportive of my relatives and be there for the people who rely on me. It's taking boys a long time to kind of realize that. And even as they get older, they still become very selfish. It's kind of like, it's kind of just like kind of me and my world. There isn't this kind of like sense of responsibility, like I'm a grown man now, I have to give back to the people that raised me, to my family, to my younger siblings, and be there for them, and my aunties and uncles and those from my family who are in it. Like even when they're grown up, they don't, that mindset isn't there, And so he talks about the importance of raising our boys to become mature, to actually become men, not look like men, but actually think and behave like men. And so these are all issues that that are related to puberty. In ahkam, in our book, the author shares it because he's speaking about the ahkam in sharia, in salah, ibadah, and so on. But these issues can be applied in a much more broader way and actually made contextualized in the modern world. And so inshallah we'll suffice with that for tonight. Tomorrow inshallah ta'ala, not tomorrow, I wasn't forget, Friday, we'll start with the conditions of wiping and istijmar. And so we're going to learn that, because how to use the restroom appropriately And so we're going to learn some of the ahkam that apply there, and also how to deal with the modern public restrooms today, and how do we purify ourselves when we are using these restrooms while making sure we're still pure enough to make our salah and so on. And so all of these rulings, inshallah, will be discussed in our next lesson. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us beneficial knowledge, to benefit us by what He has taught us, and to increase us in knowledge always. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us steadfast upon this deen, to guide us, our spouses, our children, and all of the Muslimin, to forgive us, our parents, our teachers, and all of the Muslimin, those who are alive and those who have passed. Allahumma ameen, wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.